Ladies and gentlemen, warmly welcome to our next session in our Zoom in on the OECD Secretary General candidates. And today we have the pleasure of discussing with Anna Diamantopoulou from Greece. It's a great pleasure and honor to have you here, Anna.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Alex. And congratulations for everything you do there in Florence. A nice city, a nice job.
It sure is. It's wonderful. As I've always said, returning to the academic world after a stint in politics is always fun. It's lovely to have you here today, and many of you will know that Anna has a very strong background in civil service and public service. She's been commissioner at the European Commission. She has been a minister in many different fields, including development, competitiveness, shipping, education, research, and development. And currently she's the president of Dictio, dealing with reform, and has been doing that for many years, and also holds a double master's degree. Anna, I'll start with a simple question. How has the process been so far? What does it feel like to be in a race for Secretary General of the OECD?
First, I think that there are so many distinguished personalities running for this post. It makes obvious that it is a very important organization. Now, during this period, there are some months now that we are in this race. For me, it was a very interesting one because of course, it was a digital campaign, as you can imagine from my screen. But I read a lot. I discussed with many ministers and officials from 37 countries. So now I know very well the priorities of these countries concerning OECD, and I concern it huge. Now, the process itself, it's a very difficult one. It's not a public. It is a process which has to reach a consensus, so it's not a majority process. And it has difficulties because you can imagine that the countries have various and different priorities. We hope that in the end, there will be the best one for OECD.
Have you counted how many Zoom meetings or phone calls you've had?
Yes, I have.
What are you up to now?
Until now, 114.
Oh, that's impressive. So you're a little bit zoomed out, one could say.
Okay, yes, exactly.
Yeah. Now, what made you decide to run? Because I know from my own experience that, running for a big international post is always, you put yourself out there. There's, of course, the risk of winning and the risk of losing. But why the OECD? What made you decide to run?
I think it is, I guess it is a combination of ambition and challenge. I think that my CV and my experience fits very well with the needs of this particular organization, especially in this period with transformative and difficult times, in difficult times. So I think that I can offer experience in many different areas because OECD is not just fiscal policy. It is a combination. Education is one of the priorities with the PISA program. The climate change is one priority. So I have this experience, and I believe that I can offer this experience and managerial skills to the organization. And on the other side, I believe that this organization will be very important during the after COVID period.
Yeah, and I think so as well. And of course, I mean, if I look at your profile, you've basically dealt with all the different issues that the OECD deals with. Now, what would be your top three priorities?
Alex, you were many years in politics and in academics. We both know that in order to define priorities, you must have a basic political concept, an overarching principle. And for me, this is inclusivity, because after COVID-19, in the new period, inequalities will be the major issue, inequalities among countries, within societies, among genders, among generations. So I think that this must be the main concept. And under this concept, I think that the priorities are the following. It is the digital transformation, a must for all countries, climate change policies, and I could say productivity growth as a title. And by that, I mean labor market reforms, educational reforms, health system reforms, which is a must because of the need of resilience. We need to prepare our societies, and welfare systems reform. So I think these are the three areas under the notion of inclusivity.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And what you're touching upon there are, of course, the global megatrends that we have at the moment, and very much what the OECD is all about, the OECD's DNA in many ways. I mean, those are the types of structural reforms and societal issues that it often deals with. I'm laughing here from Florence, which is not, a very close friend of the city of Pisa. But for Finns like myself, of course, the PISA studies on education are probably a godsend in many ways and very important. Now, let me ask you about the OECD as an organization. I mean, it is obviously one of the most respected international organizations, but at the same time, it's not an organization that distributes money or gives loans, say like the IMF or the World Bank or the EIB. At the same time, it doesn't, strictly speaking, set the rules for instance, trade like the WTO does. So where do you think the value added of the OECD is for its members and for the world?
You are right. When you do not disseminate money, you don't have the classic power. You have different kind of power. So OECD is a policy pathfinder, a standard setter, a global standard setter, and a reformer. Its unique power is that it combines intellectual focus with convening power across the board of many different countries and topics. So what OECD does, I'll give you two examples why I think it's really important. At the national government, at the national level, it helps, it assists governments and influences policy in different sectors. When I was Minister of Competitiveness during the crisis, the economic crisis in Greece, we had worked with the OECD and they had provided about 350 recommendations for opening markets, opening services, market services, and in all sectors, from the construction sector to tourism. It was a big help for me. It was big help for the country at that moment. At the global level, it sets standards which define a level playing field, which in turn, it is the precondition to eliminate conflicts. Again, an example. One of the major projects of OECD is how to tackle tax avoidance. It is a huge issue, but particularly after the COVID-19, to minimize the revenue losses for governments, it's a main priority because they will have more money in their budgets. So it is not only to give money. If you set standards, if you support and influence reforms, it is crucial and important. So the two issues at the global and at the national level, I believe they are the main strengths of this organization.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I remember also from government is that the OECD was quite useful in a sense. If you wanted to push for structural reform, you could say, hey, look what the OECD suggests that we should do. And at the same time, if you had done something right and well, you could say, well, look, the OECD actually likes us. So there are many sort of,
during the crisis, I have the memories of people who were so much upset with IMF, with the European Commission. I mean, there was so anger in the society for international organizations for wrong reasons, but this was the situation. Not for OECD, because OECD does not impose something.
Yeah.
So it cooperates with the government, and it's a different kind of power, of strength.
It's best practices, isn't it?
Yes.
Hey, Anna, what do you think? What do you think are going to be the most difficult areas for the OECD in the future? I know there's a close link to G20, and you talk about it yourself in your position papers. But what are the most sort of pressing challenges that the OECD should tackle with its members at the moment?
As we have already said, OECD has to proceed to provide recommendations for reforms for different countries. What will be our major difficulty? We have to combine, on the one side, to reach the climate change goals, the Paris Agreement goals, and at the same time to protect growth and increase employment. It is not an easy issue. And I think one of our main problems, one main challenges, will be how to propose reforms combining these two different issues. They must not be conflicting, they must be together.
Yeah, no, I think that's the big thing there. Now, let me ask you, on your personal experience, you have a wider range of different things that you've done throughout life, as do actually all of the candidates. But what would you sort of define as the most important one that will help you as Secretary General of the OECD?
Yes, I think my comparative advantages for this job are the following. The first is that I have managerial and political skills in 3 levels: local, I've been a governor, minister at the national level, and European Commissioner. I have dealt with more or less all the objects of OECD, so my agenda is the OECD's agenda. And the third one is that being 2/3 of my life in political life and 1/3 in academics and think tanks, I can combine politics with scientific world. And I think particularly for OECD, this is very important.
No, I think you're absolutely...
One more issue I think it's important for our discussion is that being a Greek, I have an experience in political crisis. And during the next years, political crisis will be everywhere.
Yeah, and to be honest, I'll give you a couple of examples. George Papakonstantinou, who is a professor and a chair here at the European University Institute and School of Transnational Governance. We share many of the experiences because, of course, he was finance minister during the Greek crisis. The second one is, I do admire you for having been in governance in 3 different levels, because I always say that international politics, that's fairly easy. It's about war and peace. National politics, that's when it gets a bit more difficult. And then local politics, that's probably the toughest that you can get to, because then we're into roads and schools and hospitals.
You are face to face with people's need every day, and you are responsible for everything.
Exactly. Anna, it's been wonderful talking to you. And let me finish off with a little bit of a personal anecdote, which I find really amusing and quite to the point. Now, of course, if you were to become Secretary General of the OECD, you would have to move to Paris. Now, there's a lot of stuff about you and Citroën de Chevaux. What is this all about? So do you have a car ready already for Paris? Or what's going on here?
The Chevaux was my first car. It was blue, and I had painted some white clouds in its doors. So I adored this car. It was my big love. And recently I wrote a book, From Chevaux to Drone. So I tried to show what the difference is, how things have changed since I have the Chevaux and now I have a drone.
I think it's a wonderful story. And could you promise me one thing, that just in case you become the Secretary General of the OECD, could you perhaps drive your De Chevaux all the way from Athens to Paris and make your entry in that way?
No, I cannot commit myself on this. No.
I guess it could be an environmental issue as well.
It could be. I need about 15-20 days to do that, and it's not so easy to drive a De Chevaux through Europe. I can assure you.
Anna, it's been wonderful talking to you, and the best of luck for the final stretch. And I think your campaign has been wonderful to follow as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I will keep in contact whatever the result is.